So here we've got a Kodak Retina IIIS rangefinder camera. This had just come here for servicing. It looks to be in quite tidy condition. No obvious thumps and bumps on the outside, which is always a bonus. I noticed the lens doesn't want to clip into position correctly. So that means that the pin here, for one reason or another, is not engaging in the locking slot in the lens, and that'll have to be investigated. The shutter speed dial is very stiff. Doesn't want to move at all, really. The diaphragm, the aperture settings, normally you would set the shutter speed, move the wheel on the bottom of the camera, and the aperture ring would swing over to follow. Not a sausage, doesn't work. I noticed that this plastic tab here is broken on the shutter speed setting ring. That's almost certainly as a result of because the setting is so stiff. One thing that's interesting, and I've only seen this on one occasion I think before, the maximum aperture marked on the ring here is f2.8. Now the bulk of the production, that maximum aperture would be f1.9 to suit the 50mm f1.9 lens, which was also used on these cameras. That suggests to me that the IIIS, when it was presented for market or made for market, was intended to use the 50mm f2.8 lens, and the use of the 50mm f1.9 lens was an afterthought. There's something else that points towards that too, because any of you who've used one of these cameras with a 50mm f1.9 lens on it will have noted that your view of in the finder is obscured across the lower corner there just by the larger diameter of the lens, and you don't get that to the same extent with the 50mm f1.8, of course. That's not sitting out in your field of view. So anyway, so this is my task, is to deal with this camera and see what I can do. I'm looking at this lens at the moment because I think that very probably this is a later lens than the camera body. And I say that because it's got the knurled front rim, and the earlier ones lacked that. That aside, it should work fine with the camera once we're done. So this is my task for the day, and for most of tomorrow too, no doubt, is to strip this camera, get it all back together and working. Oh, one last thing. Can you hear that rattle? That's the shutter, or components of the shutter, loose on the front of the camera. That's also something that will need to be attended to. Just as a matter of interest, I'm going to strip the front rings from the camera and clean them and see if that fixes this incredibly stiff shutter setting mechanism and aperture setting mechanism. I'm interested to see if that does make a big difference or whether the problem lies deeper. So first of all, I want to set my meter to somewhere that I can find again easily, and ASA 10 is normally the favoured spot. Oh, that really does not want to move. ASA 10. Shutter set to B. And normally I would set the aperture to f1.9. Of course on this camera f1.9 is not marked, but the aperture ring does move round one full stop from the f2.8, and I'm going to take that as the f1.9 mark. At this point I know how my rings are supposed to be reassembled. so that I can put them back on correctly. This all assumes, of course, that nobody has been here before me and already assembled them incorrectly, so that the meter adjustment is incorrect. Let's have a look at this. There's the shutter speed setting ring. It's quite greasy and the grease is fairly thick, dry and sticky. We'll remove that. That's dirty, and the aperture setting ring doesn't really want to move at all on that front ring. So I think cleaning these components and putting them back on might make a big difference to how this works. So I'll do that first, and since there's nothing exciting in cleaning these components, I shall simply clean them with some naphtha on a cotton bud. Make sure I get rid of all traces of that old grease, and I'm going to have to go into my parts and find another knob for this control ring, I think, and then I'll bring you back. I'll reassemble them to the camera and we'll see if the settings work much better. With luck they will. Well, after a false start, while I was hunting around for control knobs that weren't broken, I've got this back together, and you'll see that now the rings move entirely normally. You can set the shutter speed, and you can set the aperture simply by rolling the setting wheel on the base of the camera backwards and forwards, and it moves the meter accordingly. So that's how it should have worked. They should counter rotate. And that's what was not happening before. These controls feel absolutely normal to me. It's exactly as I'd expect them to be on a serviced camera. So our problem here with those controls being in an unusable state was simply down to the fact that the various control rings in here were sticky with dried out grease. And all that was required was to strip the mechanism from the front, clean those components, lubricate them appropriately, which is very little indeed, and put it back together again. Now I can carry on servicing the rest of the camera from here, but I was interested to see if just cleaning the front rings would work a cure in this case, and it certainly did. So points to notice if you're going to do something like that is that you need to put the setting rings back in the same place they came from, otherwise you'll disturb the settings between the settings rings and the cable drum at the base of the camera, and the setting rings and the position of the meter at the top of the camera. And you can't afford to disturb those, because potentially you could end up in the minimum that could possibly go wrong would be your meter wouldn't work accurately. But just as likely, if you'd managed to disturb the settings, you could end up with a case where you came to the end of the coupling cord before the control rings at the front had reached the end of their travel, and by forcing them that last little bit you would effectively snap that cord, and then your meter would be no longer coupled. So far so good. Interestingly, it got rid of half my rattle with the shutter. I've still got rattle, but it's now between the shutter body and the camera body. There was some rattle at this point, that's gone. Okay, well this Kodak Retina IIIS needs to be stripped down and serviced, so I'll take you through it step by step. First thing I'm going to do is remove the lens assembly, pop that to one side. I'll service that separately. So starting from the top of the camera, open the camera back, remove the rewind knob, just put something through the fork of the rewind shaft and then unscrew the knob with your fingers. You don't need to use a tool for that. In fact, it's a great advantage if you don't use a tool, because you'll end up making a mess of it. So for the top of the camera, what have we got left here now? 2 screws here underneath the rewind knob, 1 screw at the end of the top cover at that end. These are chrome brass screws, easily damaged. Use good screwdrivers and be careful not to slip. The top cover should lift off. We can pop that to one side. On top of the meter we have the meter setting button and its return spring. Put them carefully to one side. Can lift off the shutter release button. Don't disturb anything else there at the moment. I'm going to remove the strap lug from this end of the camera. I'll take the 2 screws out from the guide bush for the rewind shaft. This camera, the screws are quite tight. That is fairly unusual. Quite often things are loose. Let me find another screwdriver. I'm going to remove the rangefinder now. 2 screws down through these holes from the top. Take care when you're dealing with the screw at this end. That's a surface silvered mirror there that you run the screwdriver down past. You do not want to be touching that surface silvered mirror. And the rangefinder should lift out. Sometimes it's useful to swing it, the arm in slightly at the end. That's very sticky, that rangefinder. I'll just drop those 2 screws out from it so that I don't lose them and pop that rangefinder to one side. That's all I need to take off from the top at the moment. And I'm going to pop the top of the camera top cover back on while I deal with the rest of it. Just so I don't disturb things. I'm going to work from the base of the camera now. So I want a scalpel. I've got a lift off leatherette. Find out what I've done with the tools. I've just got the curtain pulled across at the moment because the light from the window is very contrasty and you'll see nothing. That top cover's not held on with anything at the moment, it's just sitting in place. So I remove the leatherette patch from the advance knob, pop that to one side. The 3 screws hold the advance lever in place. Just checking the advance lever, make sure it's in good condition. Making sure that the rubber pad in here is in place. If it's not, you'll need to replace it with something. It's important that it does have a buffer pad there. So I'm removing the 2 screws from the back catch cover. Lift the cover off carefully, pop it to one side, lift off the back catch cover, carefully pop it to one side, and take care not to lose the little return spring. Now I need to take the leatherette off the base of the camera. I'm working in carefully from one end. Now here the scalpel is peeling that leatherette off. It's more the levering the leatherette off than anything else, rather than cutting it free. But it very much depends on the state of the adhesive underneath the leatherette. This stuff is breaking away very cleanly and easily. Unusually so, I would have said. There's the leatherette off cleanly. I'm looking at the state of this. There's a little bit of surface corrosion under here. That probably accounts for part of the reason the leatherette's come off so easily. It does look like the original adhesive, which suggests to me that the camera has never been stripped down this far before. So I'm going to remove the chrome trim from the base plate now. One more. There are 7 screws here, all the same size, all nickel plated, countersunk head. That chrome trim should come off. That's good. Now I want to take the leatherette off the front of the body, both sides. I'm working in from the bottom edge there to loosen it up. I'm also coming in at the end here, at the catch end. Being careful here not to bend the leatherette up too much, often it's quite brittle. I'm just lifting underneath it with my scalpel. The leatherette came off very, very easily, very cleanly. The same now at the other end. The leatherette's tucked in underneath the edge of this shutter mount here, so you can't just pull it back. So I'm starting at the hinge end. And it's the same deal again, really. Carefully lifting it up, trying not to flex it too much in case it's brittle. Sliding my scalpel down underneath and that just popped loose. That was very free. Aluminium disc here, that's a cover plate for this hole in the front. This is an early example of a 3S. Your adjustment there for the cord, for the position the pulley for the cord for the meter. On later cameras that's sprung loaded. On this camera it's not, it's a manual adjustment. Alright, What's next? Oh, the Kodak sign. This little Kodak decal here, that needs to come off. It's hard to see that from because of the contrast. Little Kodak sign right here, and I'm going to get that off by using a little bit of acetone. Pick up a drop of acetone in my tweezers, put it in around the edge of that decal. I need to soften the adhesive that holds it. It won't be held in by much. But I need that adhesive to be soft. Now, sometimes these come off very easily. That's ideal. You want them to come off very easily. That little decal is fairly easily marked. It's aluminium. If you mark it, you're going to have a hell of a job finding another one. So I'm just poking at this with a toothpick now. See if I can encourage it to one side or the other. Sometimes you can get a fingernail under there. Sometimes you can't. Right. Let me clean this scalpel blade up. I'm going to attempt to hurry this thing up with the edge of my scalpel blade. So I'll just take all the glue and other contaminants off the blade. I'm just sticking the edge of my blade down along one of the long edges. See if I can pry it loose. It doesn't want to come loose. A little bit more acetone might be in order. Because that little decal is aluminium, if you dig in there and lever it up, you may bend it. If you bend it, it'll show the stress mark. You'll never get that mark out of it. I can see that it's lifting now. So I'm most of the way there. I'll put a little bit drop more down and we should be there, I think. Yep, it's lifting off. Yeah, there it is. Pop that to one side. And the reason I needed that off is one of our 4 fixing screws is down through that hole. So we've got 4 screws. That's them. I'll just see if they'll tip out for me. 2 of them did. These 2 aluminium cover patches here, they from the base of the camera, they covered the base at this position and that position. They go in underneath the leatherette and their sole task is to make sure that the leatherette doesn't end up dished in at that point, so the leatherette will sit flat. Okay, so we got 2 of those screws fell out tidily for us. 2 did not. I'm going to lift the front off now. At the base of the camera, it's wanting to take the cable drum with it. So I'm just going to see if I can pull that cable drum back down out of the way. I did. And I should be able to lift this out of the front of the camera off. There we go. So there's our shutter assembly, the front of the camera. And here you can hear a rattle. That's extremely common. there's some screws here, 1, 2, 3. But they were the ones. There's other screws as well, but those 3 there, they were the ones that were creating that rattle. We'll be pulling that apart later anyway, so that's not a problem for the moment. Now under here, this is an early camera, so it has 2 of these dished washers at each of the 4 points on the front mount, and 2 have just fallen down into the body there. I'll shake those out. Later cameras had 3 dished washers at each corner. So there we have it. We have our shutter assembly off the front of the camera. Now we have access to the meter. I'll stop and restart this because I can tell I'm going to run out of file size limit here, so I'll just stop this and restart it. Right, I can remove the meter from the camera now, so I can lift back off the top cover, which has just been sitting there. At the front of the camera here, this is our adjustment here for cable tension. In practice, I think that is pretty much slackened right off anyway. If I lift this drum off the shaft, I can peel my cable off it. That cord's probably silk, and I can lift off the meter from the top of the camera, pulling the cord back through the holes in the top of the body. Now we can remove the shutter release shaft and its return spring, the film release button and its return spring. So starting to look a bit more stripped down now. The cocking rack. To get to the cocking rack, we have 2 screws on the hold down plate at the top here. Take note of how that plate fitted. I'll just pull that rack out. The cocking rack in this camera is not the same as on a Retina IIIS camera. It is the same as the cocking rack on a original Retina Reflex, the model 025, or a Retina Reflex S, and also a Retina IIIS, I think. Don't quote me on that. To remove those screws, one of those screws has a straight-sided shaft. It holds this little guide bush in place. That guide bush supports the cocking rack. One small screw here and we can lift that chrome trim off. Pop that to one side. Alright, if you're going to remove these components from the front of the camera for cleaning, that can easily be done. This black part here, swing that back out of the way. This arm will lift up out of the way. It's got a spring on it. Be careful not to lose that spring on there. It's easily dislodged and hard to find another one. With those arms swung up out of the way, we can lift this baffle out of the way and this other light baffle here. This baffle is plastic. Keep all solvents and similar things away from it. To remove these components from the body, we have 3 screws at the top. That allows us to remove this top bracket, swing it back out of the way and lift it off. There's a fine washer underneath the bracket. We can lift off this arm. This often has the washer on the other end too, sitting on the bottom bracket. It does. Those washers, of course, are very fine, and it's not uncommon for them to not be there. Whether they're not there because they've been lost or because they were never needed is anyone's guess. Here's our transfer shaft. This has it looks much the same on both ends. One end has got a disc on it, a plain disc. And that's to stop this getting away basically. It's to keep the thing in the body, so it's retained. Now at this point there's our return spring for this arm on here, and I'm going to lift that off because it falls off by itself if you're not watching, and almost inevitably it'll fall off when you're not looking, and you will never find the thing again. So strip down a bit more now. I'll remove the sprocket shaft. We'll get into the film advanced stuff and remove that from the camera.